Communication is one of the most important things to have ever existed. Whether that be to find a mate, to work together, or to think together, communications of all sorts have led to the success of animals like parrots, bees, ants, dolphins, and especially human beings. Out of all the forms of communication, complex language has to be one of the most amazing things to exist within the universe. To have the ability to form and share terminology to more thoroughly express ideas and understandings, so we can better contemplate aspects of life within our own mind and the world around us. We humans do it with ease. We humans are essentially the universe understanding and organizing itself. Looking at the human context, we have not one but close to 7,000 unique languages. Languages that have the ability to shape the perspectives of the user's worldview. Drastically different languages may very likely have much less in common, and that is something I really want to bring to light. The ease of language has allowed humanity to progress extremely rapidly, but it has also caused misunderstandings due to implications and its sheer diversity. All mainstream modern languages are a result of oral communication that is reflective of the communities and generations that went on to alter and reshape the languages they spoke in order to make them meet the context of their daily lives. In some languages on Papua New Guinea, they separate animals not by biological classifications or actual biological relationships, but by mobility. Bats being classified with birds and cassowaries being organized with typical land mammals. In other words, depending on what is involved in a group of people's lives, the language that they create and or expand upon will reflect that. Communities more dependent on individuals or spirituality or resources or even geography will have terminology and phrases that are influenced by that. And to learn and use that language as an outsider in many cases may require you to think and talk in a manner that that language was conditioned for. And that is why local languages are so important to small communities around the world, because they want to preserve their heritage and those perspectives. Out of the close to 7,000 languages today, only about 300 of them have more than 1 million speakers, with a quarter of all 7,000 languages on Earth having less than 1,000 speakers. As of today, there are about 50 languages that only have an individual person who can actually speak it fluently. Organizations like National Geographic have gone on record saying that we lose a language almost every 14 days. And with that, we lose a perspective about how people viewed the world around them and within themselves. It's quite tragic, really. As the decades go on, we slowly see the world becoming more monolingual, for reasons such as globalization, education, entertainment, employment, being a minority, and even networking. And the largest languages today will be safe for longer due to how their speakers have been able to influence and instill themselves into cultures and societies around the world. But looking at the reality of the situation, we are not going to eradicate every single language but one. People don't want that, especially when considering how many people want to protect and revive local languages. Like the Mayan languages in the Yucatan of Mexico, the Breton languages in Brittany, France, or the most famous example of Hebrew, which was once a dead language completely brought back and has a sizable speaking population. But the reality of the situation also strongly suggests that there will be a dominant world language. And that has its benefits and its drawbacks. If we go with current trends, the most popular and widespread language on Earth is English, with about 1.5 billion individuals who can speak it. So a little more than 1/5 the population of the planet. That's pretty impressive. And just considering that English makes up 55% of all the content on the top 10 million websites, with second place going to Russian, which is only 6% of all those websites, this has only further established the importance and relevance of English in the modern world. But the problem is it the best choice? English may be the most widespread language on Earth today, but it's also got a lot of weird exceptions and spellings and stuff that just makes it inconvenient. And yes, this is definitely not something just seen in English. As with many languages, they are influenced and further developed, and sometimes you run into problems. Many of the problems in English arise with loan words, having pronunciation change over time but not spelling, having definitions that are not straightforward, and intentionally making words look like they're from another language. And yes, individuals have intentionally made English more difficult, mostly due to a aesthetic purposes, and many people want to keep it that way due to tradition, and I find a problem with that. If any language is going to be the world language, especially English, it needs to be a language that capitalizes on ease of use. It needs to be inclusive, practical, logical, simplistic if we want to minimize on misunderstandings and altercations. And one of the biggest opponents to this are people who just want it to stay the same, or as mentioned, value tradition. So we're pretty much dealing with three scenarios. Let English, mostly written English, remain impractical in order to satisfy some people, actually reform English to the best of our ability, or create an entirely new language. Now, obviously, leaving English the way it is relatively problematic because it's unnecessarily difficult. Keeping it the way it is, I feel, is very similar to trying to justify not switching to metric. And I will note that having English reformed is definitely not a new idea, actually. For example, in the early 1900s, the Simplified Spelling Board was created in the United States and the English Spelling Society was created in the United Kingdom. 2 years apart, actually, and both were trying to achieve pretty much the same thing. Out of both organizations, the only one to be noticeably successful was the Simplified Spelling Board, which is why American English words tend to have many noticeable spelling differences. And to this day, the English Spelling Society is still fighting in order to have British English reformed, pointing out economic and social costs as being major reasons. Given that the United States is an immigrant nation, that made it easier for people to want to have a spelling reform because it already had such large populations of people that didn't speak English well or at all. Where in the United Kingdom, there was much more pushback even to this day because people want to uphold tradition. When it comes to individuals who constantly complain about people who spell or pronounce things wrong, who is really to blame? The person using the given letters, or the people who are trying to justify the exceptions that in many cases you would have to know prior? Why do we justify Greenwich being spelled Greenwich? Why don't we just drop the K in knife? Why should we justify trying to keep the P in receipt, a letter that we added intentionally after getting the word in order to make it look more Latin? Though this has been a struggle in the English-speaking world, the French, the Dutch, the Chinese, and more recently the Germans have all had reforms in the way they spell their words. Though they all do have varying degrees of success, they were done for very similar reasons people want it done in English. Convenience, practicality, ease of use, and so on and so forth. So given that this is nothing new or even alien to the English language, it's definitely something I believe the English-speaking world needs to take into greater consideration. And lastly, what about just dropping English and creating an entirely new language? Now, of course, one of the drawbacks to all of this is the loss of local perspectives that are conditioned by the languages that they speak. As yes, I have said multiple times. The relationship of words in any language can completely change the way someone perceives what is being talked about. For instance, in Mandarin Chinese, the number for 4 and the word for death are very similar. This has left a cultural perspective that has left the number 4 in Chinese culture to be seen as unlucky or bad. And the opposite can be said for the number 8 in Mandarin Chinese as well. Many of my multilingual audience members, I'm pretty sure, can make an account for how when you speak a different language, you have to use different terminology to potentially express different things that don't necessarily translate very well literally or have the same impact socially. The examples are endless, and obviously you could never create a language that can satisfy and complement every single worldview. English definitely won't do that, but at the same time we are constantly battling misunderstandings, which are almost always a result of miscommunication, and it really feels like we gotta do at least something. And that can range from everything from spelling to definitions. The idea of being able to create a language that can cross cultural lines or be neutral to some extent could prove to be beneficial. J.R.R. Tolkien is world-renowned for having created languages for his Lord of the Rings series. Languages that have been picked up and expanded on by fans since his passing as well. Though he did intentionally put inconsistencies in terms of words you would have to know are specifically conjugated in a certain way and so forth, it has gone on to influence the creation of multiple fictional languages, specifically known as fantasy conlangs. Completely made up complex languages that have actually developed quite a following. And I think that does open the door to the idea of creating a language today and implementing it being something very possible. A language that intentionally was created to emphasize ease of use, logic, clarity, and so forth. We try to do similar things with almost everything we do in the world, whether that be our technology, our units of measurement, but there's so much pushback when we try to do the same things with language. Because tradition, effort, maybe a little bit of pride in nonconformity, and so forth. And as a side solution, there is also the possibility that we could create more convenient technology that can simply translate things for us on the spot. Though that could still leave issues in terms of how accurate the translation could possibly be and how someone will perceive what you're talking about. It could still be something that could tackle a few issues at some extent. So I'm gonna leave it at that, because there is so much you could discuss and so much you could consider. It does seem likely that a single language will come to dominate most of the language use on this planet. Whether people decide to keep their original language is something that is very situational and up to them, but we'll have to see. So the question for the video is, what are your guys' thoughts on the matter? In the midst of the English language dominating the world, should we consider reforming English? Should we just keep it the same? Should we consider technology more? Or should we construct an entirely new language? Please leave a comment and let me know. And with all that said and done, my name's Dale, this is ThinkFact, and remember, never stop learning and thinking. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, feel free to check out some of my other content for the facts and thoughts that almost everybody missed. Have a good one.